Hello everyone and welcome to another episode here of Minecraft and Maya. My name is Casanis. In this episode we're going to take a look at something that a lot of you have been asking me about, and that's lighting. You guys have your character finished and now you're interested in making a thumbnail or some kind of image and you want to light your scene. So we're going to take a look at that today. We're going to take a look at basic lighting within Maya, the different light types within Maya. Then we're going to take a look at a very simplistic method of lighting called three-point lighting. Now it's a basic studio lighting. There's no real way to light a scene. Let me start with that. There's no real way to light a scene. Basically, if it looks good to you, then you've done it right. If it looks bad, then you've probably lit your scene incorrectly. I'm saying that as an animator. I am not a professional lighter. Let me get that out there right now. I'm not a professional lighter. I do my own animations at home, and I light my own stuff, and I light it the way I like. Now, I'm sure there's some very, very particular tricks, lighting rigs, and that kind of stuff that a professional lighter will do, but I don't do them. I don't know them. I am not a professional lighter. I can show you what I do, and that's all I can really show you guys. Okay, so that said, no right way, no wrong way. If it looks good, you've done it right. If it looks bad, you've done it wrong. Anyway, what we'll take a look at, though, is the actual lights within Maya. Then we'll take a look at three-point lighting. And lastly, we'll take a look at Mental Ray and the options for indirect lighting within Mental Ray. Okay? So, to start off with, make sure you guys have within the show, here in the main panel, click on show. Make sure that the lights option is clicked. If you don't have that on, then when you create a light, it won't show up in your scene. You won't be able to see it, and you won't be able to move it around and that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, if you go up to the Create menu right here, click on Create, go down to Lights, and I'm just going to click on the little square here, the gray square on top, to tear this window out so you guys can see it. But that's where you're going to create all your lights, up there in the Create, Lights, and then pick your light. Now you can see there are several different options for lights within Maya. These are the basic lights within Maya itself. I'm going to discuss each one of these with you, and then afterwards we're going to take a look at, I'm going to show you an example of each one and show you the difference in each one as well. Now the ambient light, it's a blanket kind of level. It's a lighting level in your scene. If you add an ambient light to your scene, then you'll have an overall, I'll actually add one right now, bang. You'll have an overall light. This is what it looks like, and here is an example of the actual lighting. Now you can see in this example that the overall light of the scene is pretty even. It's set, it's basically just default settings, but it's set so that everything in the scene has a blanket amount of light, like a common light level to it. There's no shadows or anything like that with this. This is not a very commonly used light. As far as I know, it's not a very commonly used light, just because it does give that very flat look. It doesn't cast shadows or anything like that. It gives a very, very flat look. You might use one very sparingly for ambience or something like that, but I don't ever use them myself. Again, professional lighters might, I just don't use them myself. Okay. The next light we're going to take a look at is called the directional light. Now the directional light looks like this. Let me show you very quickly, and then I'll show you an example of how this scene looks when lit. It's basically a set of arrows that look like that. Think of an think of a directional light as a sun, as an example of a directional light. Light comes from a source. It covers the entire scene, and everything within that scene is going to be hit by that light if it's like in that direction. So you've got your light in the scene and aimed in a very particular direction, as you can see here in this example, in a very particular direction, and all the light is hitting everything that is in front of it. Everything in the scene will be lit by this. You can see that it casts very, very harsh shadows out there, very, very, very strongly outlined shadows. And this is called directional lighting. Okay, and again, an example would be the sun. All right. Let's take a look at the next light. The next light is called a point light, and it looks like this. A point light, you can think of a point light as, have you ever been to a basement where nothing's been really done yet, and they've got like these bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling? Think of it like that. It's basically a singular point that radiates light in all directions. So there's no directionality to this light. Anything around it's going to be lit by this light. And you can see here in this example that everything in the scene is lit all around it. And you can look at the shadow. You can see that the shadow itself is being cast as if the light source is not directional. It's actually coming up and hitting the characters, the light slightly below the characters, kind of where Etho's eyes are looking. It's hitting the character like that. So you can see the lights are being shone in the back, the shadows are being cast in the back as well. So there's no direction to this light at all. It's just kind of like emitting it in all directions. Okay, the next, and again, the example would be a bare light bulb, for example. All right, the next light we're going to take a look at is the spotlight, and it looks like this. Whoop. And the spotlight itself is exactly like you'd see on a stage where they're trying to shine a light on an actor. Here's an example. You can see there's a cone now. So basically, like there's a light ring around the characters. And again, we've got our shadows coming in, and the light is obviously directional because of the shadows on the ground. So basically, the way this light works is there's a singular point that emits light in a singular direction, and as it spreads out in a cone shape. So you can see it like just by the light on the ground that it's made a large ring. And if I move this farther away from the characters or closer to them, then there'll be a more concentrated or a wider ring of light. So it's basically a spotlight. It's basically a singular point that as it moves away from the light source, the lighting area gets larger and larger and larger, forming a cone. Okay, let's take a look at the next light. The next one is called an area light. Now an area light is very interesting, and it's what I use most of the time. An area light is directly affected by its actual size, its actual scale. Now this is what it looks like. I'll just show you a quick example. That's what it looks like right there. It's a square, and light is emitted from that entire square. Now here's an example of the lighting itself. Now depending on how much I've scaled this up, it's going to be more light or less light within the scene. It is directly affected, the amount of light in the scene is directly affected by the scale value of this object. So if it's small to begin with, then it's going to cast a small amount of light. As I make it larger and larger and larger, it's going to cast more and more light. That is one way of directly affecting the amount of light within your scene. There's other ways as well, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, but that is one way of directly affecting the light within your scene. This light I really enjoyed just simply because it makes nice soft shadows, which in this render look really crappy, but that's because I haven't actually adjusted them in any way, and we'll talk about adjusting shadows in a little bit. But yeah, that's what this light is. Now, this is the one that I prefer to use over the rest of them. It gives a good directional light value, and it's fairly easy to control, fairly easy to manipulate. Okay. Now let's take a look. Our last light that we're going to take a look at in this is called the volume light. The volume light is also affected by its scale. Let me just move this into position here. Boom, 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 just so you guys can see it. Now basically all this light is a sphere. Let me go back to where we were, panels. Orthographic, oops, sorry, perspective camera 1. It is a sphere, and the amount of light in the scene, the light itself is confined to that volume, to that sphere. So as I increase the value, let's say I make this 10 times bigger, then the amount of light in the scene is going to be increased, but it's still going to be contained within this volume. Now here's an example. And as you can see in this example, again, you can create shadows and everything else with this light, but you can see from this example that it's a point light, it's an emitted light, so there's no direction to it at all. Everything within that volume, within that sphere, is going to be lit, and anything outside of it is not going to be lit. But again, it is it's an omnidirectional light, I guess that's what it's called, and so basically it emits light photons in all directions. Okay, very much like the point light. However, this one here, you can control where the light is based on the volume of that sphere. By making it larger or smaller, you will encompass the area that you're going to have lighting in. Okay, so guys, that is the basic lighting. In the second part of this tutorial, we're going to take a look at 3-point lighting. Okay guys, we've got a basic 3-point lighting system set up here. Now, 3-point lighting is a very simplistic system. It's used in a lot of commercial photography as well as a lot of portraiture. And I'm showing it to you here not as an example of, oh, this is how you should light every scene, because that's not what I'm saying at all. All I'm doing is showing you guys how you might set up a scene with lights in it. That's all I'm trying to do in this situation. Like I said before, the best way to light your scene is the way that you think it makes it look best. Add the lights you think you need, and then afterwards, if you like it, render it out. But for now, we're going to take a look at a very commercialized lighting system, okay? 3-point lighting. And as the name implies, it consists of 3 lights: a key light, a fill light, and a rim light. The key light, which in our situation is located right here, bang, points at, let me look at panels, and we'll go look through selected. It points at the main subject of the scene. Now, I want people to kind of focus on Etho, and I want them to look at the beef doll, and generic pointing at the back is great too. I want him in there as well. But I want this to be the main light in the scene. I want it to be lit up along this area particularly. So here, if I go panels and I go to perspective camera 1, is my scene, and here's an example of what this light is going to make it look like. Just this light by itself. Okay, as you can see in this example, I've got a nice light falling on my main subjects. They're lit up well. They're lit up fairly well. You can see the beef doll, you can see you can see Ethos face, and you can see Generic Bee in the background. That's really what I want you to focus on. Okay, back to Maya. Oh, actually, before we go back, yeah, back to Maya. What we're going to take a look at right here is the actual values. Now, I set this, and this is going to be completely dependent on your scene. I set this value intensity to 2. So I've got an intensity of 2 coming in from this key light. Now, taking a look at the fill light, which is the second one, if I go back to this view, the second one, I have the fill light pointing at about a 45-degree angle from the key light. And what it's basically used to do, let me go back to the original scene, perspective, camera 1. What it's used to do is to fill in the harsh shadows that were created by the key light. Now the key light, because it was coming in from one direction, anything with only one light, and anything that's coming in from that opposite side is going to be in dark shadow. The fill light is used to get rid of those dark shadows and add light into the system, into the scene that's going to remove all those really dark, harsh shadows. Okay, so here's an example of just the fill light. And as you can see here, it is at about a 45-degree angle from the original key light, and it is filling in really nicely the sides of their head. That's kind of what I was looking for. I want to make sure that the sides of their head are filled in slightly, and you can see that it's much darker than the original one. I've got it at half the intensity. It's at an intensity of 1, where the key light was originally at the intensity of 2. So it's about half the value. That, again, is a random number. It's a number I chose that I thought looked good. Okay? So that's basically what the fill light is supposed to do. Back to Maya. The last light we're going to take a look at, bang, is the rim light or backlight. I've heard it called a few different things. I normally call it the rim light. And basically, it's a stronger light. You can see it has an intensity of 5. So I had a key light 2, a fill light of 1, and an intensity 5 for the actual rim light. The job of the rim light, I'll go back to my panels and my camera 1, is to make sure there's a nice separation between the background and the characters themselves. So right along this area here, I want to make sure I've got a nice shine, a nice bright light that's going to pop it out from the background behind. So this area here is going to be darker, and I'm going to have a nice shine right along here. Let's take a look at an actual example with just the rim light on. Okay, you can see with the rim light on that I do have that nice shine. I've got a nice bright spot, and the whole thing is popping out of the background. That's what we're looking for. Back to Maya. Okay, so finally, with all 3 lights turned on together, we're going to get this effect. You can see that my key light has done what it's supposed to do. I've got the faces of the characters nicely lit up exactly as I want. I've got rid of most of the harsh shadows along the side of the characters' heads that's caused by the key light. And lastly, the characters are being pulled out from the background by that nice rim light along the sides. Okay, guys, that is a simple 3-point lighting. It is, like I said, it's not exactly how you do everything. I'm not saying this is what you use in order to light your scenes. All I'm saying is this is an example of what you might do in order to light your scene properly. Okay, last thing we're going to look at in this video is the actual values that you can set within the lights themselves. Okay, and for that we're going to take a look at a area light. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, guys, we are back, and I've removed all the other lights except for the key light. I've kept that one, and we're going to take a look at the attributes involved in setting up this light. Maybe that's the first thing we should have looked at. I don't know. Maybe, but we didn't. So what we're going to take a look at now is the attributes that you'd look at when you're setting up the actual lighting system. So I've got the key light here, and I've got these values here set up. Now, if we take a look, I'm currently in the attribute editor. You saw the original image from the key light when it was generated. We're in the attribute editor. I've got the key light selected, and I've got the attribute editor up. Now, in this area here, I'm under key light shape, we can see the many different values we can actually set. First of all, we can change the color. So if I want to have a bluish light or a red light or whatever else I want, I can actually just come in here, right click, and then select the color of the lighting I want. Okay, if it's, maybe it's sunny out and you want to actually have this look like sunlight, maybe give it a kind of a yellowish tint, and you'd add kind of a bluish tint to your other ones to show the reflection of the sky, something like that. I'm not really sure. Whatever you're trying to do with your scene, you can set up the color here. Maybe there's fire all around, you want to make it orange. Whatever you want to do, you can do. You can change the color like that. All right. The intensity, we already discussed. The higher the intensity, the more light that's going to be in your scene. Now, we are using an area light here, so that's also going to be affected by the size of the light, the actual scale of the light. So make sure that you've got the scale of the light you want, and then afterwards you're going to adjust the intensity. Now, before you actually, we're going to ignore this stuff here for now. This is actually the Illuminous by default, emit diffuse, and emit specular. let's ignore that for now. You guys should just leave those things checked. That's perfectly fine for now. That's a much more advanced lighting system than we're going to take a look at. Before you actually set your intensity, what you should probably take a look at is the decay rate. Now, the decay rate is, it allows you to create realistic lighting systems. As default, the lights come in with a no decay. And what that means is if you have a light source in your scene, the light will travel forever. It'll travel an infinite distance away from its source. And that's not the way real light works, right? Like if you turn on a flashlight and you shine it somewhere, as you get too far away, you're not going to be able to see it. And depending on the wavelength of that light, like a red light, for example, has a much lower wavelength, or much shorter wavelength, longer wavelength. I forget what it is now. But whatever it is, the wavelength causes the light itself to be less visible the farther you get away from it. All right? It has less energy in the light. Okay? So basically, this decay rate will allow you to mimic real life. If you leave at no decay, like I said, the light will travel forever from your scene. You can put a light anywhere you want, and the light will travel in as far as it possibly can within your scene. Excuse me. The other options in here are linear, quadratic, and cubic. Now, each one of those is a different calculation for how far the light source will travel, how far light will travel away from its source. Cubic, obviously, is the shortest distance. It's a cubic decay rate, meaning that it'll decay at a very, very high, at a cubic rate, actually, away from its source. So the light will not travel very far at all. In fact, let's just do this really quickly. I'm going to set this to no decay is the one you saw before. I left it on no decay, the default when I was showing you the lighting system. Watch what happens if I set it up to cubic. This is exactly the same light. It's still at 2. The intensity hasn't changed. Nothing like that's changed. If I go back to my panels, I go camera 1, and I do a render. Bam. This might actually take a second here because I'm rendering it. You can see that the entire scene is black. The entire thing is black except for that eye. That's Etho's eye, and that's because it's got a special texture on it. But the entire scene is black, and that's because there's a cubic decay rate to that light itself. So, realistic lighting is actually quadratic. If you want to have realistic lighting, you can set it to quadratic, and that will allow you. Then you have to up your intensity. Your intensity will have to be probably 400 or something. I don't know, some outrageous number like that. Something you're gonna have to play around with. I oftentimes use linear, and that allows me to have some type of decay, meaning that the farther you are from the source, the less likely you're going to be hit by the light. All right. I often use linear as mine. Quadratic, I just find to be it's realistic lighting, but I just find it to be it's just too much. It's just you have to pump up the values too high to light the scene properly. So I often use linear. In the examples I showed you earlier, I left it on no decay, and that's perfectly fine as well. You can leave it on no decay if that's what you want your system to look like. In fact, in the scene that I'm lighting here, it probably doesn't really matter, simply because I have no background or anything else in the scene. Right? It's just these two characters, so having no decay was perfectly fine. All right. Something else I want to take a look at is the different types of shadows. There are two types of shadows within the system. There are ray trace shadows, which I currently have on, and there are depth map shadows. Depth map shadows are not as accurate. They're not as clean as the ray trace shadows, but they are much, much, much faster to render. So if you are concerned about render time, you can use depth map shadows. That said, I definitely recommend ray tracing if you've got the time and the machine for it. Ray tracing allows for really, really attractive soft shadows. Okay, so here's an example of a ray traced shadow with the shadow rays set to 1. Now you can see in this example that the shadows are they're dirty. They look dirty. They're not nice and clean and soft like you'd expect. Upping this value to, let's say, 20, bang bang, will make the shadows much cleaner and softer and nicer. Here's an example of what a ray trace shadow with 20 shadow rays look like. You can see here that we've lost a lot of that dirt, that grit that were in the shadows before. We've got nice, clean, and smooth shadows here. And that's really what you want to do. Now, there's a law of diminishing returns. As you increase this value, this shadow rays value, you increase your render time as well. So be careful. You're going to hit a point where you say it's no longer worth it. Try and find that point, and that's what you're going to use. If you're doing a single image for a thumbnail or a background or something like that, pump it up. Make it as high as you want. Make it look as clean as you want. At some point, you're not going to notice a difference anyway. But that said, play with that value until you find what you like. And then afterwards, render it out. Okay, guys? So that is basically what I wanted to show you. There's not really much more in the lighting that you need to know. Everything else is pretty much just trial and error. You're going to go in, you're going to play with these different values. I mean, there's a lot more stuff in here. There's a lot more stuff, and if we were going into a really in-depth lighting system, then we'd take a look at it, but we're not actually. We're just doing really simple lighting for simple animation. All right, guys? So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Basically, what you're going to do is set up the lights the way you want them to, and you're going to play around with these values until you get an attractive looking image, and afterwards you render it. That's how I do it. That's how a lot of those of us who are not professional do it. Okay, I'm not a professional lighter, but I hope you guys enjoyed that anyway. I hope that you guys enjoyed that episode. I hope it taught you a little something about lighting and that you're able to use it to create your thumbnails and your images. Alright guys, if you enjoyed it, let me know with a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, a thumbs down is perfectly fine too. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and I'll try my best to answer your questions. And if you haven't done so, take a few moments to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.